Okay, so these are the set of topics we are going to talk about. First, we're going to talk about the concept of data binding. We'll talk about the concept of interpolation, property binding, and event binding, and two-way data binding. In fact, there are 4 different kinds of data binding: interpolation, property binding, event binding, and two-way data binding. And we're going to actually talk about the concept of local template references. And then we're going to see how we can actually use the input annotation for custom property binding, and we're going to actually see component lifecycle. So what is data binding? So the concept of data binding is not something new in Angular. Pretty much all web application framework has a concept of data binding. So what is data binding? Basically we want to have UI components to be reflected in the backend, in the classes, right? So we want to generate and display dynamic contents, and without framework level data binding, a developer himself or herself would be responsible for pushing the data values into HTML controls and handling user actions, which triggers the value update, right? So we want to actually manage the data in the HTML controls with the properties of the class. So Angular data binding framework handles all these things for you. All you have to do is to use proper data binding markups in the template. So as I said, we are going to have multiple data binding schemes, and each data binding has a direction. So basically, you can think of data binding is the interaction between template and component class, and the direction is it could be one way or two way. So in this case, the direction is whenever the property value of component is changed, it will be reflected in the template, or whenever something changed in template, we want to actually have some kind of event binding, meaning some kind of event to be triggered. So this is the direction. So let's actually take a look at these 4 different types of data binding. So this interpolation. So 3 of those are in fact one way. One way, I should say, one way direction, and the 4th one is the two-way direction. Okay, so one-way direction includes interpolation. This is something that we have seen already. And then we have a property binding. Then we have, this is the different direction. This is from the DOM to the component. And finally, we have a two-way data binding, which is actually, whatever you change in DOM will be reflected in the component, and whatever you change in component will be reflected in the DOM. All right? So let's take a look at each of these data binding in a bit more detail. All right, so first, interpolation. So again, we have seen the interpolation already. Interpolation is basically evaluate this expression and then convert into a string and get displayed. So we have seen these title things already, right? So let's actually we're gonna actually use the data binding component, brand new application. So data binding app here. And let's actually again run the ng-serve. So view integrated terminal and ng-serve, and then we should be able to see app works as we have seen in the hello world, right? Okay. All right. So once this is up and running, then we should be able to actually see app works. Okay, and AppWorks is basically displaying the value of the title as we have seen before, right? Okay, so this is the title. Okay, and you can basically specify whatever values using this the 2 curly braces. Okay, so all right, so now it's done. So let's actually I should actually, okay, so 4200, and then it app works. Again, we can see here app component, and here this is the app works. Okay, so I can say again data binding app works, something like that, and that should be reflected right here. Okay, so if you take a look at the HTML template, you're basically using these two curly braces title. So what we can see is that we can certainly have some kind of you can certainly actually invoke some kind of method, okay, and whenever there is actually some kind so we're gonna take a look at this one in a bit more detail later on. You can certainly actually specify hero magic URL for image, and so let's actually try that. So in the app component here, we are gonna actually create the let's say image src, and I can specify I know that there is actually image file in JPassion.com and images and Duke JPG file. Okay, and I'm gonna actually provide another property called I'm gonna actually have the method. So my method is and it is going to return hello jpassion.com or something like that. Okay, and I should be able to actually use the image src and my method in my template here. So here I can say of course I can just type image src and also I should be able to actually call my method, right? So I can say so this is my message result of calling the method, and here I can my method like this. Okay, so I should be able to see the result. Let's save the change, and okay, so this is the URL, and this is the result of calling method hello jpassion.com. So pretty straightforward. Okay, so let's just move on. Okay, so this is the lab. I want to add two properties with types to be component, with the types, so string data and number data, and then add a method called the get all data, which is actually returning the value of string data and number data. Okay, as an optional lab, I want to add two more properties, name and age, and then add another method called the get personal data method, and use these things to get displayed using interpolation. Okay, so I'm going to give you. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so that is the first kind of data binding using, that is the interpolation. Next, data binding scheme is called the property binding. So let's see how that works. Property binding, the syntax is basically using square bracket, and then you are saying the name of the property, and then expression resolving to required value type. And the simplest possible expression is just the 3 plus 5 or something like that. But typically, you want to specify the name of the property of your class, or it could be a method. Now, typically the property binding is used with a DOM element. So for example, if you happen to have an input element could have a value DOM property, and then this could be expression. So this could be a property of your component, and that property of component will be used to display the input value. Same thing for button, so in this case, disabled. Button DOM element has a disabled property, and this could be valued as a true or false. So depending on true or false, it will be, this button could be disabled or not. The same thing for image. So this is something, we actually see an example where we are using interpolation, but you could use the property binding. Okay, so let's see an example. So what we want to do is, we want to actually have input element. So I'm going to just type it. This is the property binding. So we just so this is the interpolation example. And now we're going to actually moving to property binding. So property binding, I want to actually have input element here, the value, so the value property of input element, I want to actually reflect a property of my data, binding component. So I know that we have a string data. So let's say string data. So let's actually see what it does. So we are going to see the input element is reflecting the string data, sang. Okay, so the string data, we know the string data has sang here, right? Okay, so that gets reflected. Now let's take a look at the same thing with the number data. Now let's actually see the button. Okay, so we want to have a button to be disabled or not, depending on some kind of a property. So here we are going to actually have some kind of Boolean type. So I'm going to call it switch. And we are going to actually provide this Boolean type. Yeah, it's, whenever possible, you want to actually provide a type, okay? So here I'm going to provide false first. Okay, now I'm going to go here. I'm going to have a button and a button here. I do not want to do any event-driven data binding yet. So here button is, I'm going to use a property binding. So it's going to be disabled. And the value is going to be, and this is going to be a switch property. Okay. And this is the click me. Okay, so let's save the change. For now, the switch is set to false, meaning disabled is set to false. So button should be clickable. Okay, so let's actually see the change. Okay, so this is actually clickable here. Now, if I change the value to true, now we want to disable it. So save the change to true. Now you're gonna see this is gonna be now disabled. Okay, oops. That is not good. So this is a switch and Boolean is set to true. Let's see, actually I specify it correctly. Oh yeah, so it looks like I mistyped it here. Switch. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now it's actually disabled, right? Again, if I change it back to true, so if I change it back to false, actually, false, now it should be clickable. Okay, so that is what you observed. Now, the last one is actually image. So, we have actually seen an example where using interpolation. Now, we could use the property binding. So here, let's actually use the image SRC, and that is the string type. And again, that could be HTTP JPassion.com and images and Duke JPG. So we specify the URL as a string type to image SRC, and then we could use image. And here I am using the property binding, and here I can just specify image SRC like this. Okay, and that should work fine. So the if you just so I'm going to actually show you. Yeah, so it works fine. Another example that we have seen using interpolation is something like this. So image, if I want to use interpolation, then it's going to be SRC, and it's just the interpolation of image SRC. So it works, this one should work fine as well. Okay. Okay, so we see, both images actually working fine. All right, so I'm going to give you guys about 5 minutes to try this lab. Okay, property binding. So property binding is basically the value is coming from the class, in this case, from the component to the UI, to the, in this case, input controls, in the UI controls. Okay. Okay. Now let's explain the concept of a local template references. Okay. So local template reference is used to make a reference to a DOM element. Okay, and you're going to use the pound sign, and it is local to the template. That's the reason it's called the local template, and it's not available to the component class. Okay, so you just use it in the template. So basically, I could have a p element, and I could actually say pound, and this is the name of the that element. And then I can actually access the property of that element. So I can actually call the text content and things like that. Okay. And this is another example. Here we have input element, and then I'm going to make a reference to my input. And then when you actually calling a button with the some kind of event method, I can pass that value. Okay, so you haven't actually talked about the event data binding, which is what you're going to actually talk about right after this, right? So this is one way I can actually pass the value of this input field as an argument to this onClick event method. Okay, all right. So basically you use a pound sign. All right. So are we going to actually talk about event handling right after this? So let's actually talk about event binding. So event binding for the the button, you're gonna actually use the click, and then this is the name of the method. Okay. So in this case, when the button is clicked, I'm gonna call onClick method of my class component class, and this is where we are actually passing the value. So whatever value of this input field. We have a local template reference called the my input, and we are passing the value of it. So the value of that input field will be passed to onClick method as an argument. Okay, and it doesn't have to be the method of the class. Method of the class. It could be just the JavaScript code. I'm just passing these items into this item into this items array or things like that. Okay. Okay, so let's do the lab. So I'm going to actually do this lab myself, and I'm going to actually let you do this lab on your own. Okay, so basically we want to add a button with event binding. So when click, call a method in the component. Okay, and initially it's not going to actually receive any argument. Okay, so here we have a data binding component class. I'm going to actually call it, so let's actually take a look at data binding HTML file here. So h4, and this is the event binding, and we are going to actually create the button click, and here I'm going to call it onClick method. Okay, so we are going to have onClick method in our component class. So we're going to have onClick method. And basically, for now, we're going to just type. We're going to just display console, the log, and we say onClick is called. Just verify that onClick method is being invoked correctly. So save the change, and let's actually see the result here. Okay, I want to actually, so this is the text. So I want to actually make sure click me. And I'll just actually remove this guy. All right, save the change. So this is the last button here. So when I click this guy, we want to actually see the console message get displayed. Click me. You can say onClick is called. Okay. All right. So that's not that much exciting. So we want to be able to actually pass some value, right? So here we're gonna have input field, field here, and we're gonna actually give a name, local reference. So pound sign, I'm gonna say my input something like that. And when onClick method is invoked, we're gonna pass the value. So it's gonna be my input dot value. Okay, so whatever in input field will be captured as a value will be passed as an argument. So we need to actually go onClick method, and it should actually receive the data. So data, and we are going to actually now display data. Okay, all right, so this is basically now when I click, so this is input from field. I'm gonna say jpassion.com and click me, and you can see onClick is called and the value is being displayed as well. So this is a way that we can pass some value using local reference. Okay. All right, so that's what we did. Add a button with the event binding when click, get a value of an input element via local template reference and display back to the page. Oh, okay, so this is not that much exciting to use the console.log. So what we want to do is, we want to actually have another property called here, the received value, something like that. And then what we want to do is we are going to this received value, and then we're going to actually say data, and then we want to actually display this received value in here. Okay, so here, and you're going to use the interpolation received value. Okay, all right, so save the change. Now we should actually see, so if I say hello world and then click, oh yeah, I should actually see I expect the hello world being displayed right here. So let's see why it doesn't do that. So we have received the value, so let's actually here, oh, see, wrong spelled. Okay, yeah, so received value. Okay, so now we should actually see things work correctly. So hello and click, okay, now it's actually being displayed. Hello 2, yeah, now it works fine. Okay, so that is a lab. All right, okay, so I'm gonna give you guys about a few minutes to try this lab. Yeah, one thing I have not demonstrated is using event handling to switch on and off the buttons disabled property. Okay, so let's actually demonstrate that. So what we want to do is, we want to have let's actually have another button on switch, something like that. So we're gonna have another method called onSwitch. And basically all we want to do is we want to actually change switch value with true and false, back and forth. Okay, this switch. Okay, all right, so the on switch. Okay, now we are going to have another button here, and button click, and it's going to be on switch method. So here the toggle switch. Okay, so basically whenever this button is clicked, this button will be enabled and disabled, right? So let's see whether that works. Okay, so toggle switch, yeah, so see the behavior of this guy. So toggle switch, yeah, so you can see that click me is disabled and enabled whenever I click toggle switch. Okay, all right, so that is the part of the exercise. Now we're going to talk about two-way data binding. Okay, so What is a two-way data binding? Basically, whatever change you have in the input box or DOM will be changing corresponding property in the component class. Whatever change in the component property will be also reflected in the input box or UI control. So basically, it's called a two-way data binding because either change in either part, will be reflected in the other side. Okay. The two-way data binding syntax is a bracket and parenthesis and ng model. So this is the keyword that you have to use, and then this is the property of the component class. So this is input element. Whatever you typed in will be reflected in this case, username property, and whatever change you make in username property will be reflected in this input control. Okay. Two-way data binding is convenient, but it also has a performance implication. So you want to use this two-way data binding only when it is needed. Okay, so this is one, in fact, the change from Angular 1. And Angular 1 is always two-way data binding. And what the community found was that two-way data binding is convenient, but it's expensive. Okay. In general, you want to use a one-way data binding if that serves your purpose, and use two-way data binding only when it is needed, mainly from performance standpoint. Okay, the lab. So what we're gonna do is create a brand new component called the two-way data binding in the same directory of the data binding component, and then create a person object which contains the name and age property, and then add the input element whose value is two-way bound with the name property, and then add another input element whose value is one-way bound with the name property. And let's see how things are behaving whenever you change one of these two input element, right? Okay, so let's actually do that, and let me actually demonstrate it, and then I'm gonna actually let you do this exercise yourself. So we want to actually create the two-way data binding component in the same directory of data binding. So I want to actually go to here, SLC app and data binding here, and then I want to actually create ng generate component, and I'm gonna call it two-way data binding and dash flat, which means I'm creating these four components, these four files in the same directory where the data binding files are. So now we have a two-way data binding. Okay. So here in two-way data binding, and of course I need to actually, first thing I want to do is I want to actually make sure, so if you take a look at the this component file, this is the selector. So I need to actually use this selector in the app component root page so that whatever in that component gets reflected. Okay. All right. So when I see the change, I should actually see two-way data binding works page, the two-way data binding works message to be displayed. Okay. All right. So I am going to go to this guy, and I'm gonna just remove this one and H4, and this is gonna be two-way data binding. So here I want to create the so I want to actually create the two elements, two input element. Input here, so this is the one-way binding. So I'm gonna say user.name, and then so also I want to have local template reference, my input 1, something like that. And let's see, I'm gonna actually have a button, and here I'm gonna call it on click, and I want to pass the I'm gonna call on click 1, and I want to pass the value my input 1 dot value. So this is the value that I'll be using to change the username here. Okay, so this is the one-way property binding. So now I want to actually use the same input and button here. Now I'm gonna use the two-way data binding. So here I'm gonna actually use here ng model. So when I use the ng model like this, then this is the two-way data binding. So here I'm gonna use the onClick 2 like this. Okay. All right. So I need to actually provide the onClick 1 and onClick. Yeah. So this one should be my input 2. My input 2. Okay. So I need to actually provide the onClick 1 and onClick 2 method. Okay. So let's go to this component class. And onClick 1 method is receiving some data, and this is the one that I want to. So I want to actually create a user. Okay, so here I'm gonna say user has, basically I can just have name property and string type, and so this one, yeah, this is the JavaScript object. So it's and age number. Let's see, cannot find name string. Oh, yeah, this one I has to just, the value sang. Yeah, so this is the actual JavaScript object, age 34, 45 or something like that. Okay, and on click 1, we want to, we're using the data, so we're gonna actually say this user name will be reflected with this data like this. And we're gonna have on click 2, same thing. So here on click 2 and the same thing. Okay, so let's actually save the changes. Okay, all right, so this is the this is the okay, so this is the first one is the property binding, and this one, second one, is the two-way data binding. Let's just make sure that we are in fact the so this is the property binding, T binding click, and this one is two-way binding click. Okay. So now, this one is actually a property binding. So even if I change, so you know what? I want to actually display user. Here we want to actually display user as well. So here, how about user dot name? Okay. Okay, so saying, so in property binding is actually from the from the property class to the UI. So here, even if I change this guy, this doesn't get reflected. However, in two-way data binding, if I change this guy, you can see, so basically I'm changing in the UI, that gets reflected in the property. And because things change in property, this guy is also being changed. All right, so you see the difference here? Okay, all right, so I'm gonna let you do this exercise. I'll give you a few minutes to try that. Now we're gonna take a look at how input annotation is used for custom property binding. So in many cases, we want to be able to use the same UI component. So in our case, I'm gonna go to app component here. Again, I'm not gonna use the two-way data binding. So I want to actually use, this component multiple times. Okay, and we were able to actually use the ng content in the child component so that the parent can actually pass around some fragment like this, right? Now we have another way of actually passing some values. So what we want to do is here we want to actually pass around some the values. So if you take a look at the app data binding component, so let's take a look at the data binding component here. There are some properties here like a string data and number data. All right, so when you're using this data binding component, the parent component actually passes a different it wants to set these properties with the values of its own. So what we want to do is in app component here, I want to actually set the string data property of this child component. So something like so I'm gonna say the string data, and here I want to actually provide my own value here. All right, so here I have to actually use the another quotation here, and string data is this is the parent one value. And if I want to use the different value for that, then again I can actually pass around the string value like this, parent2, something like this. Okay, now you can actually see the string data value will be actually set with this parent1 and parent2. So let's actually see. Oops, yeah, looks like we have some issues here. Okay, so that is what's going on here. String data is Angular. It has the string data input, and verified is a part of the module. App data binding is web component, blah blah blah. Yeah, so it looks like we have introduced parent string data. So we should have a data binding here. We have a string data, right? Yeah, we have a string data here, and let's see. Yeah, string data. Yeah, so that should be. Oh, okay. So yeah, in order to receive it, I have to actually do in the data binding component, I have to actually use this input annotation. Yeah, so that I missed it. So input annotation like this. Okay, and we have to import it. So Control I, and will be imported. Okay, now it should work fine. Okay, so now string data. So in this case, the this is the parent one. So this is the parent one, and this is actually parent two. Okay, so you can see the value is actually coming from the parent instead of its own value. Okay, so the that's basically what the input is all about. Now, if somehow if you actually go to the parent here, this property value has to be the same. It has to match with the the property name of string data. However, if a parent wants to use a different thing, so for example, here instead of using string data, I want to actually use a string data 1, right? Something like this. Okay. In this case, I go to this child property here, and I can specify string data 1. So this is the property that is used in the parent template, and that will be actually used to set this string data. Okay, so now if I save the change, things should work exactly the same. So parent 1 and parent 2. Okay, all right. So that is actually input. basically input annotation is used to get the data from the parent. Now, this is not that much interesting because we are kind of hard coding these values, right? So instead of actually hard coding this, I could actually have some property values from the parent. So I go to parent here. Let's say I have the some value. My value is the Sang Shin, JPassion, something like that. So this is actually from the parent, right? Okay, and I want to use this parent property to pass it to the child component. So when I go to here, instead of actually hard coding value, then I can actually use the actual parent property is going to be my value. Okay, so I'm going to actually say my value 1 and my value 2 to provide a different value. My value 2. Okay, and these my value 1 and my value 2 is actually from parent component. So here my value 1, so I'm going to say JPassion my value 1, and I want to have my value 2 and my value 2. So instead of actually hard coding the values being passed to the child component, I want to actually have those things actually coming from the parent component. So here you can see JPassion my value 1 and JPassion my value 2. Okay, all right, so that is basically input. So this is basically explain how the input works. Okay, whoops. And typically you want to receive from a parent. It could be in fact a method. So why don't I actually create a method? So get my value 1 method is going to return, and this my value actually this my value 1, and I'm gonna copy this guy, get my value 2, and this should return value 2, and indent, save the change. And here I want to get my value 1 and get my value 2. Did I spell it right? So if I go to get my value, okay, so I spelled it right. And again, if I see the change, it should actually work pretty much the same, right? Okay, so that works. So if I refresh the page, it works the same. Okay. Okay, so the lab is basically what I just showed you. So why don't you actually do what I just did? Or you can actually have the another property called the result, another property called the some value, and then you can just use the this input annotation to receive the data from the parent component. Okay. All right. So I think that is the oh, okay. So we can actually move on to component lifecycle. We can actually skip the so this one actually I should remove it. And then component lifecycle. So I'll give you a few minutes to finish this up. Last topic of this presentation is component lifecycle. So you have seen, if you take a look at the component gets created, let's take a look at the component. You can see this component implements on init interface. So basically, Angular has a lifecycle hook methods on component and directive as it creates and changes and destroys them. Okay, so on init interface has ng onIt init method. On destroy interface has ng on destroy. So here, this is actually added as a default. Okay, so basically ng on init is whenever component is initialized, this callback method is actually being invoked, and the other direction is on destroy when the component is being destroyed. ng on changes every time data bound property gets changed, and ng do check is every time Angular change detection cycle starts. So Angular actually has what is called the change detection cycle. So basically, once in a while, whenever there is some significant event happens, it actually makes sure the two-way data binding and one-way data binding is all kind of being handled. Okay, so let's actually add some method here. So the lab is going to be, we're going to just add ng on init. So we're going to here add, let's say, console the log here, and we are going to have ng on init called. Like that. And we are going to implement ng on display. So on destroy. Okay, and then we have to import it. Okay, and as soon as I actually have on destroy, it complains about the fact that there is no ng on destroy. So we have to provide ng on destroy method. And here console.log and ng on destroy called, something like that. Okay, so let's save the change, and let's actually see what is actually being displayed. Okay, so you can see there are two ng on init method is being invoked because we actually creating two instances of this data binding component, right? Okay. And let's see if you can actually add other hook methods. So how about the ng on changes? So here we are going to implement on changes and do check. Okay, and we have to import and import. Okay. Oops. Okay, now we have to implement ng on changes and the console.log ng on changes called. And we are going to implement ng do check and the console.log ng do check called. All right, so let's actually what is being this time is being okay. So you can see we actually have ng on init twice. And the do check is called, and on change. So if I actually have let's actually if I do something like check me, so whenever I actually click a button, it's calling do check. Let's see if there is a two-way data binding. Oh yeah, actually kind of remove that guy. Yeah, so basically do check is every time Angular changes, detection lifecycle starts. So whenever you make a change in your input element, it will actually trigger Angular to check if there is anything that it has to deal with. So that's the reason it's calling ng do check. Okay, so whenever ng do check method is called, that means the Angular is actually performing some kind of change detection cycle. Okay. All right, so that is pretty much what I have in mind for optional labs. So yeah, so we haven't seen ng on destroy, because we are not destroying anything. Okay, we haven't learned what is called the ng if directive. Ng if directive is to remove a component. So why don't I actually just demonstrate that? So here. I want to, so I'm going to just delete the first one, and here let's see, what I want to do is div element, and inside the div element I'm going to move this guy, and basically what I want to do is I want to use what is called the ng if, and so to ng if, and this is an expression. So here I'm gonna actually have some kind of switch, and switch, and I want to have this switch to be back and forth to be true or false, right? So I'm gonna have button click, and on switch method, and so click me, and now we're gonna actually go to this app component here. So we're gonna have switch, which is boolean, and it's gonna be true or false. For now it's gonna be true, and then we're gonna have on switch method is gonna be just trigger the toggle switch, this switch like that. Okay, and then what happens is that whenever the switch value is actually being true or false, this the data binding component will be initialized or it will be destroyed. Okay, so let's see how that works. Okay, so the toggle switch. Oh yeah, I kind of expected let's see, app data binding. Here we have all this destroy, ng destroy. So let me just clean here app component. Yeah, so app component, so we on switch is gonna be set. So whenever I click I have to actually call the this guy on switch, click me. Yeah, so looks like I have a toggle switch. Yeah, click me. Yeah, so this is click me. Yeah, so this is the one that I need to actually call. Okay, yeah, this toggle switch is actually from the data binding component. So whenever I click this guy, you can see destroy is in fact the destroyed, and now we are creating it, and then destroyed. Okay, so depending on the switch, the data binding component gets created and destroyed. So that's basically I'm demonstrating. Okay, so that is the